It's 3 a.m. The room is dark, the house is quiet, and your mind, which was perfectly manageable 6 hours ago, has decided that this is the hour. Not for rest, not for peace, for everything you've been successfully not thinking about. The conversation you handled wrong 3 weeks ago. The relationship that ended and somehow still hasn't ended inside you. The version of your life you imagined at 20 and the version you're actually living now. The thing at work you cannot control. The person you are trying to become and the distance between them and the person lying awake in the dark right now. Your mind pulls them out one by one into the silence, not to solve them, just to examine them again. You know you should sleep. You know that turning this over at 3 a.m. changes nothing. You know that. And knowing it changes nothing, because at 3 a.m., feeling has all the power and knowing has none. Here is what nobody told you about that mind. It is not broken. It is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is not the consequence of failure, weakness, or a life that is somehow more difficult than it should be. It is doing something very specific, and the man who figured out what that specific thing is, who named it, diagnosed it, and found the exact prescription for it, was not a therapist, not a scientist, not a life coach with a morning routine. He was the most powerful man in the world. Managing simultaneously a plague that had killed 10 million people across his empire, 2 wars on different borders, repeated betrayals by people he had trusted with everything, the deaths of his own children. And he still had 3 a.m. thoughts. He sat with them by candlelight in the pre-dawn hours of a dying Rome, in a private journal he never intended anyone to read, and he wrote down exactly what he found. We still have those pages. We call them the Meditations. What he wrote there is the most useful thing I have ever encountered about the anxious mind. Not because it is ancient, because it is true, because it works, and because the man who discovered it was living through something so much worse than what most of us will ever face, that his discovery carries a weight that nothing written in comfort ever could. This is what he found. Most people believe their anxiety comes from their circumstances. The job, the relationship, the financial situation, the difficult person, the uncertain future. Remove the circumstance, they believe, and the anxiety will follow it out. Marcus Aurelius tested this theory under the most extreme conditions any human being has ever governed through. He removed nothing. The plague continued. The wars continued. The grief did not lift. And at some point, writing before dawn, before Rome woke and placed its first demand on him, he arrived at something that stopped him completely. He wrote it in a handful of words. I discarded anxiety, not from the situation, but from myself, because it was within me. Not outside, not in the plague or the wars or the betrayals. The suffering was being generated inside him, specifically in his judgments about those events, in the meaning he was automatically, relentlessly assigning to what was happening, in the story his mind was writing without asking permission about what all of it meant for the future. The events were real. The suffering lived in his interpretation of them. And interpretation, unlike events, lives entirely within your jurisdiction. This is not a small distinction. It is the reason Stoic philosophy survived 2,000 years while every comfortable philosophy collapsed. Because a person who believes their suffering is always caused by external events is permanently at the mercy of a world they cannot control. They will spend their entire life trying to arrange their circumstances into a configuration that finally produces peace. And because the external world never cooperates fully or permanently, they will never find it.
But a person who understands that the suffering lives in their interpretation of events has found something no one can take from them, not a circumstance, a jurisdiction, a place of genuine authority over their own inner life. Marcus wrote it plainly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Not comfort, strength. The specific kind that comes from directing your energy toward the one place where it is genuinely effective. Now, here is where this
becomes something you can actually use. Because understanding this intellectually is one thing. The 3 a.m. mind doesn't live in the intellect. It lives somewhere older and louder. And reaching it requires something more precise than a philosophical principle you've read and nodded at. Epictetus understood this. Epictetus was not born with the luxury of philosophy. He was born a slave in a Greek city in the 1st century AD. He had no legal rights, no protections, no freedom of any kind. His owner, a secretary in Nero's court, one day, for reasons history doesn't fully record, but that require no explanation, began to twist his leg, deliberately, slowly. Epictetus looked at him and said, without raising his voice, "You're going to break it." The man pressed harder. The bone cracked. Epictetus looked at him and said, "Didn't I tell you?" No rage, no begging, no collapse. Just those words. This was not performance. This was a man who had understood something so completely that the understanding had reached his body. That there is a part of you, the part that interprets, that judges, that chooses, that nothing can touch unless you hand it over. He called it the prohairesis, the faculty of choice. And he built his entire philosophy around one practice, correctly separating what belongs to that faculty from what doesn't. He reduced it to a single question you ask about every thought that arrives uninvited. Is this mine to affect? Not, is this real? It may be completely real. Not, does this matter? It may matter enormously. Is this mine to affect? Right now, tonight, in this specific moment? And the answer must be honest. Because when you answer that question honestly about the thoughts that visit you at 3 a.m., something remarkable happens. Almost everything keeping you awake moves into the same category. Real, significant, and completely beyond your reach tonight. The other person's response, the outcome you cannot determine, the decision already made, the past that cannot be altered, the future that hasn't arrived yet and that your mind is currently treating as if it has already happened in its worst possible form. These are real. They deserve your attention. But your attention at 3 a.m., exhausted, isolated, without the information or resources or perspective that daylight brings, has no power over any of them. Your anxiety tonight is not solving them. It is only costing you the rest you need to actually address them tomorrow. So here is the practice. 2 columns. Every thought that arrives, 1 question. Is this mine to affect, or is it not? Assign it honestly. Everything in the 2nd column, put it down for tonight. Not with indifference, with the specific understanding that your suffering over it right now is purchasing nothing. Then ask yourself one more question. What is the one thing I can actually do tomorrow? Concrete, specific, genuinely mine to affect, that moves me toward the life I want to be living. One thing, for tomorrow, yours. That is where your energy belongs, not in the right column at 3 a.m. Here, in this column, in what is genuinely yours. There is a line in the meditations that most people read past without stopping. It is 4 words. Marcus wrote it to himself, in private, during a period when the weight of expectation on him was without parallel in recorded history. when the empire needed him to know and to decide and to act every waking hour of every day. He wrote it as a reminder. You don't have to have an opinion about that. 4 words, written by the most powerful man in the ancient world, to himself, because he understood something the 3 a.m. mind never accepts on its own. Not everything that arrives in the dark demands your verdict. Not every ambiguous message requires a theory about intent. Not every uncertain outcome requires a narrative about what it says about your worth or your future. Not every unanswered question needs to be answered tonight. A thing happened. It may be real. It may matter. You don't have to decide what it means right now. The mind is a meaning-making machine. It operates automatically, relentlessly, without asking for your permission. It receives a tone of voice and constructs a full theory of the relationship. It receives an ambiguous event and immediately builds a story about what it says about you, about where this is going, about the worst version of what might happen, about what all of this means for who you are and who you are becoming. Most of those stories are wrong. Almost all of them are built without sufficient evidence, and the darkest, most convincing ones, the ones that arrive specifically at 3 a.m. when nothing is available to check them against, are the ones most likely to be the products of an exhausted imagination, not accurate readings of reality. You do not have to have an opinion about that tonight. You can let it remain unresolved. You can accept that you don't know yet. You can choose, deliberately, as an act of genuine self-governance, not to decide tonight what a thing means, or where it is going, or what it says about your life. That is not avoidance. That is not weakness. That is the exact practice Marcus Aurelius prescribed to himself in the pre-dawn hours of a Rome that was dying around him. Here is what has been misunderstood about Stoicism for 2,000 years. The practice is not to feel nothing. That is not Stoicism. That is performance. It is unsustainable, it is damaging, and it is completely at odds with what Marcus and Seneca and Epictetus actually taught and actually lived. Open the Meditations to almost any page, and what you find is not a man who feels nothing. You find a man who is genuinely frustrated with people who repeatedly disappoint him, and who writes to himself about patience, not because it is easy, but because it is not. You find a man exhausted by the weight of a duty that never lifts and never thanks him. You find a man who grieves children, who feels the pull of bitterness and has to work every single day not to give in to it. He is not performing calm, he is practicing it, and that distinction is everything. Seneca wrote something about this that changes how the entire philosophy lands. He said, "If you simply ignore your emotions, it is like putting the debt on a credit card. You are not paying it now, but eventually it comes due, and the interest makes it far more expensive than it would have been." The mind does not forget what it is not examined. It holds it. It waits. It accumulates quietly behind the busyness of the day until the day ends and the busyness is gone and there is nothing left between you and what you have been carrying. The 3 a.m. mind that arrives without a name, the anxiety with no clear source, is almost always carrying something that has not been looked at directly in daylight, something real, something significant, that has been deferred because daylight never felt like the right time. The mind brings it to 3 a.m. because 3 a.m. is the only quiet hour when the examination can no longer be avoided. And the Stoic response to that is not to suppress it, not to tell yourself to stop feeling, not to perform a peace you do not have. It is to finally look at it, to name it specifically, to examine it honestly, to ask what is actually true here and what is story. what is yours to affect and what is not, because a thing examined directly in whatever light is available has far less power over you than the same thing avoided in the dark. Marcus didn't lie awake waiting for the thoughts to stop. He wrote them down. He engaged them. He examined them by name. He processed what was real instead of running from what was real. That is the practice. The last thing Marcus understood about the anxious mind is the one that requires the most deliberate effort to maintain. The 3 a.m. mind travels. It moves backward into conversations already had, decisions already made, losses already absorbed, things that exist now only in memory, things that cannot be changed from where you are lying in the dark at this hour. Or it moves forward into futures that haven't arrived, disasters that may never happen, outcomes that haven't been determined, scenarios that your mind has constructed with the confidence of fact and the evidence of nothing. What it almost never does without deliberate practice is stay here, in this room, in this breath, in this moment, the only moment that is actually happening. And here is the thing the Stoics understood that most people spend their entire lives missing. The thing you are anxious about at 3 a.m. almost never exists in the present moment. It exists in your interpretation of something in the past or in your projection of something in the future. Both are mental events. Neither is happening right now in this specific second. Right now, are you in danger? Is the thing generating the anxiety actually occurring at this moment? For almost everyone lying awake in the dark? No. Seneca wrote it as plainly as it has ever been written. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Not because real suffering doesn't exist. It does, and he knew it better than most. But because the mind's capacity to suffer in anticipation is nearly unlimited. And the 3 a.m. mind exploits that capacity with an efficiency that feels almost intentional. The past and the future are where anxiety lives. The present is where it cannot breathe. Come back to here. Not to the conversation from 3 weeks ago, not to the uncertain outcome 6 months from now. To this room, this breath, this moment that is the only one you are actually inside. Marcus wrote it as a command he gave himself repeatedly, like a hand placed on the shoulder of a man who keeps drifting. Confine yourself to the present. Not because the past doesn't deserve reflection, not because the future doesn't need to be prepared for, because here is the only place where your presence is of any use to anyone, including yourself. Tonight, not at some point in the future, tonight, before you sleep, find 5 minutes. No phone, no background noise, just you and a few honest questions. First, what am I actually anxious about right now? Name it specifically, not in general, the specific thing or the specific person or the specific outcome, because the unnamed fear is the one with the most power over you. It spreads into everything precisely because it has not been given a specific form. Give it one. Name it. Second, is this mine to affect right now, or is it not? Answer honestly, because if the honest answer is no, your suffering tonight is not solving it. It is only costing you the clarity and the rest you need to actually do something about it when the sun comes up. Third, what is one concrete thing I can do tomorrow that is genuinely mine to affect, that moves me even slightly toward who I want to be? One thing, specific, yours. Then put the rest down for tonight. Not forever, not with indifference. For tonight, with the understanding that your sleepless worry over what is not yours to affect right now is purchasing exactly nothing. This was Marcus Aurelius's evening practice. Not as performance, not as ritual for ritual's sake. The way a craftsman reviews his tools before closing his workshop. Not to judge them, but to know what needs attention tomorrow. He found it every night, even during the plague, even during the wars, even during the grief. 5 minutes, 3 questions. The same ones the most burdened human being in the ancient world used to finally lay down what could not be solved in the dark. By the way, before we continue, I want to give you something. Everything in this video goes far deeper in a book I wrote called The Inner Sanctum. It contains the sacred Stoic teachings on suffering, peace, and the unbreakable mind that most people never reach. The full system, not the surface. If what you are hearing right now is resonating with you, that book was written for exactly where you are. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment below. Now, let's continue. When we started, it was 3 a.m. The room was dark, and your mind had decided that this was the hour for everything you had been successfully not thinking about. You know now what Marcus Aurelius discovered by candlelight before a dying Rome. The thoughts arriving in the dark are not evidence of what is happening outside you. They are evidence of what your mind has been carrying inside you. Unexamined, unnamed, and given far more authority than honest assessment of reality would ever grant them. The 3 a.m. mind is not broken. It is pointing at something you haven't fully faced yet. And what you face directly, what you examine honestly, what you name with precision, what you assign correctly to its column, loses the power it only ever had in the dark. The Stoic invitation is not to feel less, not to perform peace, not to suppress what is real. It is to finally look at it. Because what you can see, you can examine. What you can examine, you can understand. What you can understand, you can use. And what you can use, the anxiety, the fear, the grief, the uncertainty, is no longer something that happens to you in the dark. It becomes the material you build something from. That is what Marcus was doing, not escaping the weight of his life, learning to use it. What changes is not the darkness. What changes is that you stop being afraid of it. Chaos is loud. Ancient wisdom is louder. Tell me in the comments, what does your 3 a.m. mind come back to most? You don't have to be specific, just the category. Work, a relationship, the past, the future, something you can't control, something you're afraid you're becoming. Name it here, because naming it out loud is the first act of the practice we just walked through together. I read every single comment on this channel, and if this video reached you at the right moment, share it with one person you know is fighting this same battle in the dark. Because that is what this wisdom was always meant for, not the lecture hall, the 3 a.m. hour. When the only things available are either understanding or suffering, you now have the understanding.